You've had the next few sessions planned for weeks now. You've had that itch, and making new characters that you'll never get to play just isn't scratching it anymore. It's time to take on the big one, the project that has seemed too daunting until now. It's time to build your own world. Nearly all of my campaigns have been set in my homebrew world, and it is growing constantly inside my head. Having my own world that I built lets me play D&D away from the table. It encourages me to learn new things like geography, ancient politics, and history. It even helps me fall asleep at night. As I lie in bed, eyes wide open, unable to sleep, I will start thinking about my world, and 10 minutes later, I'm out like a light. But there is a huge hurdle you have to get over before you can get to this point, where you always have that world at your fingertips to build whenever you want. Where do you start? I suggest starting your world the same way I did, and it's not just from scratch. There's already so many amazing worlds that are built out there, so use someone else's excellent work. Like the work of our first sponsor, Mammoth Factories. I'll be using one of their adventures, Dragons of the Immortal Flame, to build a brand new world right here, right now. This is one of just 8 full adventures that is coming out in Mammoth Chronicles Volume 1. You could use any of the adventures from this book, but I chose Dragons of the Immortal Flame because it already has so much excellent world building in it, and it is a perfect setting in which to start. You can use official Wizards of the Coast content to start your world building, but I would advise against that because they already have a fully fleshed out world, and if your players are familiar with it, they will know details that you might accidentally get wrong in your planning, and that can lead to some awkward situations. If you use third-party content, most of those worlds have only just been started, just the spark you need to start your own unique one. So taking a look at Dragons of the Immortal Flame, everything highlighted in red is going to be world building. The introduction actually provides a pretty concise synopsis of what the adventure is going to be. The beating of vast wings sounds over the Eastern Isles. In a desperate bid to prevent the outbreak of war, the characters must cross the territory of an immense draconic empire, dodging its agents at every turn. Unbeknownst to them, a hidden threat lurks in the shadows, planning to use them as pieces in its great game. They must defy its machinations if they are to escape unscathed from the Dragons of the Immortal Flame. Yeah, subtle title usage right there. But essentially it sounds like this is going to be a intrigue campaign where the party is traveling across a huge empire of enemies. Now we get into the real world building of what exactly this empire is. Far to the east lies the Avarossi Archipelago, a chain of sweeping sun-kissed isles that curl gently southward like the tail of an immense leviathan. Right there, we've already got a start to a map. 30 years prior, the Drakari Ascendancy arrived at its easternmost shores, finding a land divided among petty kings and plagued by rampant monsters. Again, 30 years ago, so history of this empire. A vast imperial power from a distant land, the Ascendancy did what it does best. It tore through small, squabbling kingdoms, putting their kings to the sword, and gradually bringing island after island under its rule. So we've got an evil empire of dragons taking over this archipelago. And it has been doing this for years, for decades. So we have a villain, sort of, already. We have a political force inside this world. And we have actually several political forces because of the small squabbling kingdoms mentions other kingdoms that weren't able to, stand up to this empire. The advance of the Drakari seemed unstoppable. For 5 long years, their armies crushed all opposition to their advance, annihilating the bands of goblinoids and dangerous monsters that infested the archipelago in those days. It was only when the last remaining human kingdoms of the island chain banded together that they were able to bring the conquest to a standstill. I've seen in many places that peace is not normal if everything is left as it is, and if there's not a couple people trying very hard to prevent war, people will go to war. It sounds like that's exactly what is happening here. The Drakari are going to war as a part of expansion, to expand their territory, to expand their influence, and we have those last remaining human kingdoms still. So that will be important later, I assume, both in the adventure and in the world we're building, because we now have 2 opposing political forces, an alliance of human kingdoms and a dragon empire that's trying to take over. The old powers of Avaros have remained united to this day under the banner of the Emerald Concordant, and for the last 25 years there has been an uneasy stalemate between the 2 sides, one that is easily exploited by an opportunist of great enough ambition and power. So there's already a set history going into this adventure. There are things that have happened in this archipelago alone, and that's all we need for this adventure. But for building a world, this empire cannot just be in this archipelago. There must be other places where the Drukhari are invading, not just these islands. That might be the nearby landmass. Where are the Drukhari from? Are they from that landmass? Are they from across the sea? I would think if they're an empire, they would be from a close landmass. Empires usually expand into neighboring territories. It sounds like they've gone beyond just making a colony in this archipelago. The exiled dragon, Varaxathra, taking advantage of the Drukhari governor's desire to make up for his military defeat over 2 decades ago, convinced him to abduct Lord Uric, a major figurehead of the Concordant. She intends on using any attempt at retaliation as pretext for reigniting hostilities and retaking her old position within the Ascendancy. So right there we have our villain, and it sounds like, since it's a dragon, this dragon has been established for a while and is trying to take back her old position, like it said. So in the actual adventure, it looks like our job is going to be rescue Lord Uric, bring him back. And that's a solid pretext for an adventure. Going into the very first part, we start into micro world building. So instead of these grand broad strokes of empires and maps and everything like that, we are going to have exactly what the players are going to experience. So on a smaller scale, like individual buildings, individual people that they will interact with initially. One thing I really like about this adventure specifically is all of these readout texts, where you only have to go ahead and just read this word for word to your players, and it is excellent. Just listen. The midday sun warms your face as you step out onto the pier. The port town of Madyal climbs along the edges of a steep bay, its streets looking from a distance as though they crisscross gently downward into the sea. And this itself is also world building because it's describing what an established power looks like. I mean, what something looks like, especially something big like a city, is not going to change very quickly over time. So this readout description that is being used for Madyal is going to be used every time a new party goes up to this city. Then after the description, it looks like it goes into more logistical things about the town. Madyal is the sole official point of entry for merchants and foreigners seeking to make their way into the Ascendancy territory. So immediately right there, one thing you need when you're building a world is, where does this settlement get its money from? Why are people living here? Why is this settlement here on the map specifically? For Madyal, it is the sole official entry point for merchants and foreigners that are trying to get into the Ascendancy. So right there, being an entry point, you're going to have tolls, you're going to have all sorts of living fees, you're going to have dock hands, you're going to have ship captains. There's going to be so many people here to make a living. Then it goes into more details about this population. The native population of humans that fill most of Madyal's winding streets are welcoming, healthy, prosperous, and fiercely proud of their place in the wider empire. Citizens are more than happy to explain the unofficial name for the port, the Bay of Fire, a title it gained after a historic Ascendancy victory, where one of its draconic nobility burned an entire enemy fleet to little more than ash, lighting up the ocean for miles around. That is an epic piece of history. That is going to be a story that all of the population is going to know. Everyone there is going to be obsessed with it. It wouldn't be difficult to tell this bit of information to the party and have them know, okay, there's a war. This was a battle that happened. Many locals of Madyal wear white spider lilies in their hair and on their clothes. These flowers mean nothing to the wider Ascendancy, but they're an important symbol to subjects in Avaros. The flowers commemorate the Battle of Bealzan, another battle. This is war, so people are going to know the names of battles and what happened there, where the Ascendancy came to the aid of what was a then besieged human city-state, crushing the goblinoid hordes that surrounded the settlement and slaughtered them to the last. So it sounds like, that was mentioned earlier, but the Ascendancy is invading under the pretext of, we are saving you from the goblins that you've been dealing with for decades. And it sounds like, at least in this town, it is working very well. The people of the city are very happy to be a part of the Ascendancy. Now an actual specific part of the city, the gates. There is one official way in or out of Madyal by land. the stately gates to its northwest. There's a large, often crowded town square in front of them, and it goes into more and more description about these guards, this town square. So you have another piece of description of something that is permanent, that multiple parties will go around. Another thing I like about this is they outline almost all the world building stuff in these little text bubbles, these extra cutouts on the page, so you can separate the world building from the actual adventure itself. And here it says Dragon's Tail is talking about the islands that we already know are in the shapes of a tail of a leviathan or a dragon or something like that. 4 are under human rule and 5 are under the Drakari ascendancy. And the adventure itself only takes place on one of these islands, which means you have 8 more to build out yourself underneath these humans and these dragons. You can invent histories for each one of these islands. Next is details about the goblinoid hordes and the monsters that plague the lands. We already know about those. The next is another really important piece of world building about the climate, the biome that this is in. So this is a land of dry, hot summers and mild, rainy winters. The terrain alternates between steep, rocky mountains and sweeping plains dotted with hardy shrubland plants. People tend to wear airy, flowing clothes, often bearing much of their skin. This is actually a great piece that looks at what the people look like in response to what the biome is. It is a dry island, so it is going to be hot despite having all the cool air coming in from the surrounding sea, and that results in people wearing this type of clothing, something that will breathe and keep them as cool as possible. Another piece of world building, especially if you're building a town specifically, is that there's going to be some sort of criminal presence. In every civilization, there's going to be crime. If there are laws, there are people that are going to break them. What they've done is they've created this criminal underground about the city. It doesn't appear to be an organization itself, but you can definitely change that when you take this for your own world building. You can make a previously unorganized crime ring into an actual organization. So some sort of mafia. Another extra world building text box here. The Ascendancy was formed ages ago, and more about history, its founder, where it comes from. And since this doesn't appear to be a big part of the adventure, you can definitely just change this. Either cut it completely and rewrite it yourself, or change details that you kind of disagree with or don't think are that great. As expected, the governing force of the Dragon Empire is, Dragonkin. And it looks like a good place in which to live. This empire isn't like the empire from Star Wars, where they rule with fear and military force. The people actually part of this empire want to be here, like the citizens of Madyal, which is important when you're considering how people are going to react when this empire comes and invades. And so far, it brings up the question of why are these other human colonies resisting? They already have the goblins to deal with, and this extra force comes in and says, become part of our empire and we will take care of the goblins for you. So I need to know what is going on there. That's what I'm thinking as a world builder. If the Ascendancy has one fatal flaw, it is that its inherent religious convictions compel it to spread its prosperity at the point of a sword. People are forced to spread religious word and expand the empire, or they'll be killed. So that right there is why this empire is evil, and it's why a party would want to fight against it. Here's details about a temple inside Madyal. So another great example of a specific structure that exists outside of this adventure. It gives you details about what it is exactly, why it's there, and it gives you the building blocks of what exactly you need to build a temple of your own. You can take this and change it, or you can take this and copy paste it into your own world. It looks like this text box is all about their religion that they mentioned earlier. Spread this religion or we'll kill you. It looks like Mammoth Factories actually invented a new religion, because I do not recognize this from any of the official D&D content, and that is excellent. Personally, I haven't invented a religion myself. It's on my to-do list. I think just this text block of religion is exactly what you need in order to start building your own world. And it's another reason why this specific adventure was the one I chose. And next up, even though the world building itself is pretty sparse here, there is an inn. Every world has to have a tavern. Every single party that I've ever run is going to go to a tavern first thing when they go to a new city. So having this pre-built is super helpful when you're trying to build the rest of the world yourself. The rest of this document is almost entirely the adventure. So you can run this adventure yourself, get something set in the world, so your players know something about it before you start expanding it from what has already been written. That's what I did with an old adventure, and it's what I suggest that you do as well when you are starting your own world building journey. Thank you to Mammoth Factories for sending me one of their upcoming publications. A few last tips on world building before we close out the video. First is you don't have to do all of this world building yourself. When my players write backstories for their new characters, I allow 90 to 100% creative freedom. That means they can write a new order of paladins. They can write an entire country. They can say, there's a coup that happened here. That actually did happen, and it's going to be coming up soon. Let your players do some of the work for you, and then use what they wrote in your campaign. They will love you for it. Okay, I can't talk about world building without mentioning outside-in building versus inside-out building. Outside-in building is where you do broad strokes for the world, a full world map, all the countries, all of the general pieces of a world that you think of when you think world building. You take those broad strokes and you work inward towards the smaller details. Inside-out world building is the exact opposite. You start with an individual character and their experiences, maybe your whole party's experiences, and from there you build all the countries and maps around that. I do a little bit of both of these kinds of building. When I'm building a new session and my characters have a place they're going, I will make sure to build that location inside out, because the details are what the players are going to see, so they're the most important. But if I have all of my sessions planned out already, which is, most of the time, I will start outside in. This way I can fill in the spaces and have ideas for where I want the party to go eventually, and when the party starts traveling there, that's when I'll start on the details. My favorite part about having a homebrew world is that it is never done. There is always more detail you can put in, borders to expand. Even if your map is already complete and there are cities everywhere and you don't want to write any more, you can just make it a different time. Say a war broke out between two countries and now one of the countries has been wiped off the map and is fractured, and now you have a place for 3 new countries to grow up. Worlds are constantly evolving and this project will never be finished. But the point of building a world is not to finish it. It's to enjoy the process. Thank you again to Mammoth Factories for sending me one of their upcoming publications to help me show you how to build a world. Mammoth Chronicles Volume 1 will be coming out soon, but there's still time to support the project and get prizes for pledges. Links in the description, along with the most recent details on the project. And now that you've started building your own world, everything is going to be okay.